everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Light the World podcast. I'm your host, LT. And today I have with me a very special guest to help share with us about some Hindu holidays that are going on right now across the world. Please allow us to introduce Pushpita and feel free to tell my audience about yourself.
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and discover somebody who's as passionately interested in different religions and the ways people celebrate them as I am. So, my name is Pushpita Prasad, and I am part of an organization that is called the Coalition of Hindus of North America. And we basically are a group that is focused on educating and advocating for Hindu Americans in the US and Canada. Because we've been here now for a couple of generations, and we're a very different faith that is very hard to understand. And we realized that, like any immigrant heavy community, we were not really doing a good job of talking about ourselves. So that was our attempt to get out there and focus some time and attention on doing that. So excited to be here. My personal background, I live in California. I have worked for a couple of decades in the technology industry, and I like to call myself a storyteller. I'm a PR professional and a technology comms person, and I love the idea of storytelling because I think, despite the advances that we've made, and that the format of storytelling has changed, but your YouTube channel is a way of storytelling.
Mhm.
Um, in some ways, stories still appeal to us. It's the most fundamental way humans have communicated. We all have heard
Mhm.
stories from our parents and grandparents, and you've gone on camping trips and had the stories handed down to you, and we hear of stories within stories. So I really do. That is something that really appeals to me
I
in
would even
communicating.
say that today we have more stories than we ever have because people are
Mhm.
constantly pushing stories out on the internet, whether that be blog posts,
Yeah,
videos, movies,
yeah,
books. Like I would say we have more stories available to us today than we ever have
yeah,
in our entire history.
yeah. Absolutely. And I think the power of stories, right? They come across you from generations. Everyone knows of stories that were first probably nobody, you don't know when the story was first told. You don't know the author of that story, but the resonance, the power of the story lives on in its
Hmm.
telling and retelling. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's very true. And if you don't mind me asking, did you grow up within Hinduism or was it something you converted to later?
no, I grew up as a Hindu.
Okay.
And
Hmm.
it's an interesting statement to make because it's one of the things I always like to say whenever I talk about anything related to Hinduism or its festivals, is that my iteration of whatever I say may be very different from what you might hear from another Hindu,
Hmm.
because if there's one thing I feel comfortable saying about Hinduism is that it's super diverse and very hard to define. So my
Yeah.
experiences, what I share, is very linked to my personal journey in life, the environment I was born into, the time I was born into, my own personal qualities, and what motivates me. So,
Hmm.
every time you talk to, and that could be different from my own sister or my own mother. So I think it's a very contextual, but it's also a very experiential faith.
Yeah, I will definitely say on my channel, I get a lot of comments, obviously. And whenever it comes to my Hindu videos, it does seem like there's a lot of people in the comments who don't fully agree with what was mentioned in the video because they have their own sort of perception on the topic. And there's but like for instance, another religion like Islam, there tends to be a lot more agreement among the commenters about the topic. So I just think that is interesting that Hinduism is very diverse. And when I started studying it, I was like all the books were like, yeah, this is one of the hardest religions to try to cover as a broad religion because it's so individualized.
It is. It is.
So,
And we have the concept of something called an Ishtadevta, which is your personal deity. And that could be, like I said, different from my mother's, my father's, my sister's, it's just
mhm.
who appeals to me.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
yeah, my daughter, whatever.
Yeah. But one of the things, if I understand correctly, when it comes to Hinduism, that does bring it together as one singular tradition, at least to the best of its abilities, is sometimes some of the holidays and stuff like that tends to bring a lot of people from the Hindu culture together, even if they have different perceptions. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And right
Yeah.
now it is holiday season, by what I understand, within Hinduism. Just help explain to the people what holidays are going on right now. Which ones did you just celebrate? Which ones are coming up? And what are their significance and what's their meaning?
Absolutely. You have it right. Hinduism is a very personalized faith, but it's also a very community-based faith, not in the way the West totally or understands it. And I think one of the best ways or the most visible ways non-Hindus experience Hinduism, wherever they live actually, is through our festivals.
Hmm.
Because we're not an evangelizing faith, so it's very rare to find a Hindu who goes out there and talks about themselves or is really keen to tell you about themselves.
Yeah.
Um, but when we celebrate, we celebrate with everybody and anybody who wants to join. And so some of our celebrations can be fairly ritualistic and private and religious in nature, but many of them are extremely extravagant and joyful and a multi-sensory experience, that's also like a public celebration and which totally is open and available to anybody who comes with an open mind. You don't have to be a Hindu to celebrate or partake in Diwali or Navratri or Holi or any of these. You
Hmm.
just have to be someone who enjoys being part of that experience. And I think that is really important. So, right now we just concluded what is called Navratri, which is Navratri literally means 9 nights. Nav is nine and Ratri is nights. So it's 9 nights of the goddess. And I think that's something that is one of the reasons I am very proud to be a Hindu. I think it's the only mainstream faith in the world today which still celebrates and really honors and reveres the divine feminine that surrounds us. And so, if you talk of representation, which is a big deal these days, Hindu women and little Hindu girls growing up have no lack of representation at the highest levels of theology and power structures and everything.
Hmm.
So I think that's really unique. And Navratri is an amazing time because it's a 10-day festival where the community gets together and people get together in their home, and it's literally, if a festival exemplifies diversity, power, and femininity in one word, that's it. Because you have the whole community coming together to celebrate. This is not like girl power kind of thing with only women celebrating women kind of thing. Like the whole
Yeah.
community comes together, men, women, children, and it's an exuberant outpouring of love and devotion for the goddess in her many different forms. And now, 90 to 95% of the world's Hindus live in India. So the Indian subcontinent is really home to a lot of these traditions.
Hmm.
And within the Indian subcontinent, this festival lends itself to massive diversity in how it's celebrated. The Western part celebrates it totally different from the Eastern part, from the Southern part. But common to all of these threads is the concept of, celebrating the divine feminine, and also the story of Ram, who is also then linked to Diwali. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of your listeners probably have heard of Diwali. It's about if they don't know anything else, they've probably heard the term. Diwali's truly gone mainstream in the US and Canada over the past several
I
years.
think Will Smith even went to a Diwali celebration in India like a couple years ago or so.
Yeah.
It's the
Well,
Festival of
I mean,
Lights, right?
it is translated as a festival of
Okay.
lights. It's a
Yeah.
lot more, obviously. But yeah, and it's actually been celebrated in the White House, I think, since the George Bush 2 days. So it's been
Okay.
a while. Yeah, they do a nice little function they'll get a pundit from the local temple and, community leaders and the
Hmm.
president will get together and light a lamp, a diya, and obviously they have some other stuff, sure. So it's kind of been nice to see that kind of recognition. Diwali is also growing in importance. It's becoming a holiday in some areas. It's school holiday. So I think in the state of New Jersey, New York is working on it. So and then if you look at Times Square, there's a lot of stuff that now happens in Times Square to honor
Hmm.
Diwali. And yes, the most visible aspect of Diwali is lights. And why not? Because the word Diwali actually is a derivation of the Sanskrit word Deepavali, and
Hmm.
Deepavali quite literally means a rows of diyas or deeps, and this is like a traditional deep. You can see it's a tiny little clay thingy, and what happens is in the pre-electricity days, people would fill oil in it, and put a little wick and light it.
Hmm.
And so and that's where the word comes. And so you have a whole line of these, and that's the Deepavali. and that's what lent the name to the festival, Deepavali, and that's why
Okay.
Festival of Lights, because it's quite literally characterized by people massively decorating their houses and characteristically putting up a row of lights around it. Now, the lights could be, the diyas, as I showed you, traditional oil-filled lamps, which are obviously less common now because they're messy and it's a boatload of work.
Yeah.
Um, and also, they're kind of hard to find if you don't live in places which have a big Hindu community.
I would also imagine they're a
It
pretty
could,
big fire hazard depending on the type of home you live in.
um, I mean, you'd like anything, you wouldn't leave candles unattended.
Yeah,
But
fair enough.
yeah, I typically put them outside on my front porch.
Mm,
So the worst that happens, typically they were put outside, so the diyas were put outside even traditionally. So
okay.
people would line the outside of their houses, or this, wherever they would find an adequate space, they would put these. So the impact from outside when you have a neighborhood that's completely lit up is just visually spectacular.
Hmm.
So nowadays, of course, there's a lot less of the oil lamps, and there's a lot more of, like, wax candles or diyas, tea lights or electric lights. So
Hmm.
the best way I like to explain it is sometimes neighbors might wonder why a house next to them, or five houses down, somebody puts up lights in October, and you're like, dude, is Christmas? It's really too early for Christmas. What's that dude up to, right? And if the lights are going up in late September or October or early November, it's a good indication that you might have a Hindu neighbor who lives there,
Mm,
because the timing of these festivals shifts a little bit, but they generally come around this time. And the dates shift a little bit because our festivals follow the Hindu lunar calendar. So it's not going to come on the same day every year for the Georgian calendar that we live by.
hmm. Now, you mentioned earlier something about the story of, was it Ram?
Yes.
What is that story? You may sound like it undergirds the two holidays we're speaking about here.
Yeah, so Bhagwan Ram is, so if for I know I know folks may not know much about the Hindu so there are in Hinduism we have a concept called avatars, where the divine people, where the divine entities, in this case Lord Vishnu, they take birth as humans, and that's an avatar. So
Hmm.
Ram is one of the most popular avatars of Lord Vishnu, Bhagwan Vishnu, and he lived several thousand years ago. We have a different system of cosmology and timekeeping, which I know some of your videos have explored. And Ram is a very iconic figure because you find references to him obviously throughout the Indian subcontinent. His life story is told in a book called the Ramayana, quite literally the story of Ramayan.
Okay.
And it's a very, again, it's the power of stories, told by a guy called, first told by a Rishi Valmiki, a sage Valmiki, several thousand years ago, and we're still telling and retelling that story and reliving incidents from that story. So I won't go into too much details, but literally references to Ram can be found not just in the Indian subcontinent, and all the countries that are part of it, but also Southeast Asia, Thailand and Indonesia and
Hmm.
Bali and all of the, all of these places, they have references to Ram and Garud and people from his life. So it's a super interesting story. But to cut it short, there was a long story. He and his wife were exiled from their kingdom, and they were living for 12 years in the forest. In the forest, there was an evil demon called Ravan who saw her, and for a long story, basically ended up kidnapping her and taking her to his kingdom in Lanka, which many people say is today Sri Lanka. And she was captive there, and Ram was hunting for her with his brother, and he enlisted the help of many, many different people, including Hanuman, who is another very popular deity. You might have stumbled into his name as you talk about Hinduism. And a massive battle ensued. And at the end of a 10-day battle, Ravan was defeated and died, and Sita was rescued and was back with Ram. So that's the gist of the story. And so the way the stories are linked is that um, so 20 so 10 the culmination of the battle of Ravan with Ravan, the death of Ravan is the 10th day of Navratri, It's called Dashmi, the 10th day, or Vijay Dashmi, the day of victory. And 20 days after Vijay Dashmi comes Diwali. And the story is that so Ram won this big battle, right? And it was also the time that the period of his exile got over. So he and Sita returned to their kingdom in Ayodhya, and there was a massive celebration, and everybody because not only had he won a battle, but his subjects were seeing him after a period of that whole multi-period of exile.
Yeah.
So there was a massive celebration, and the city of Ayodhya was lit up with the rows of diyas, Diwali.
Hmm.
And and also interestingly, if you Google map walking directions from Sri Lanka to Ayodhya even today, it'll give you walking distance of 20 days. So I mean, not that anyone's going to walk it, but if you wanted to walk it, it's going to take you 20 days to walk it.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so among Hindus, there is a belief that all of our stories are not they're stories, but they're also itihas, and itihas is literally the Sanskrit for as it happened. So
Yeah.
these are not just stories; these are historical records of incidents that happen. Now, obviously, stories told over that many years are not going to be a perfectly accurate record, but ultimately, they're all linked in history, and a lot of the dates and the places that they mention can actually be validated, through modern techniques, and you find those same places in the same time zones. Everything is kind of linked together. If you wish to make a if you wish to make a geographical map of the Ramayana, it'll actually map pretty closely to places in India today that
Yeah.
still bear, and the people there will still tell you tales that, oh, there is a temple here, and Ram and Sita came and did this here, and that is why this spot is sacred. So there's definitely a lot of so that's how the two festivals are linked. And
Yeah.
also when that battle was happening between Ram and Ravan, so the reason we worship the female divinity, and the role that the Devi occupies is she is the one that comes and fixes the job when the male deities are unable to do it. And so basically, she is armed with the powers and the weapons of all the male deities, and she basically finishes off tasks that they're struggling to do.
Hmm.
And in the story of Ramayan, when Ram was having this 10-day battle, there was ups and downs, and he was praying to the Devi for victory and for strength and for sustenance too. So there's a lot of linkages between these different stories. Now, like I said, in Hinduism, there is never one story. There are many, many stories. The story of Ram is very popular in North India, and but in the southern part of India, they actually celebrate Diwali more as Naraka Chaturthi, and that's the story of a different, Lord Krishna victory. That's a different story that is told there. But again, the celebrations are very so, and you'll find this a lot anytime we look at Hindu festivals. That there's a lot of there could be a lot of regional variation or variation by family,
Hmm.
by whatever, and by whether which kind of deity do you believe in. There could be a lot of customization and differences based on that, but you'll find a lot of common threads and shared values that show you that this is quite clearly the same festival.
What are the
You know,
common, I mean, obviously with, I guess with Navratri is the lights and stuff, but what are some other common threads between the festivals that would kind of connect them?
between Navratri and Diwali.
Well, no, the between the different celebrations across the different
Yeah,
areas.
so if you look at Navratri, which sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. So now I'm going back to talk about Navratri, which is the 9-day festival. And so if you look at Western India, there the festival is celebrated through a dance called the Garba. It's literally the whole community gets together, and in some of the larger garbas that happen in India, you have like 100,000 people gathering each night. And
Wow.
and that's just like if there's one in the city of 100,000, there are probably neighborhood versions going on that are smaller.
Yeah.
So and in the center of the dance there will be a small earthen pot with a light and a visage of the Devi, and that'll be suddenly sitting in the center of the dance, and there'll be like five, ten, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people around that dancing. So even though it's an exuberant time, and I certainly envision encourage everybody to go check it out. Um, the center of it is ultimately you're worshiping the Devi. You're having a great time. You're dressed to the nines. You're having awesome food. There's lovely music. It's a great. People are having a lot of fun. It's high energy. It's a community-based festival, but the center of it is the Devi. And then if you go to the southern part of the country, you won't I wish I could show you some visual aids. Anyway, the southern part of the country, you won't have this dancing stuff. People have more personal displays in the house, and they'll put up these 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 steps of displays, and they'll have a collection of different deities and different kind of images and artifacts that are very special to them. And it can be a small display, a big display, a giant display, depending on. But the center of it again is the worship of the Devi. And no matter how small or large your display is, every morning you'll get up and you'll make like a special food and do like a little ritual and light a diya
Hmm.
to pray to the Devi. And it can be a small function, it can be a massive function attended by thousands. If you go to East India side, you'll find a different facet of the Devi Puja. And here you have massive community pandals, or I guess like kiosks that come up. And the murtis now can be like, instead of that small representation in a pot that I was talking about, the murtis can be the size of a garage or bigger. And the community gets together, erects them, prays to them, takes care of them, has a celebration in front of them. And then at the end of the ninth, on the 10th day, the murti is put in the water, because that's a very fundamental belief that the murti is envisaged with divinity as part of the prayers that you're doing to it. And once that prayer period is over, it's really back to the elements. Then the murti is returned back to the elements that it's made of, which is like water and earth and fire and the standard elements that you have. And then in the northern India, you'll have all of this, and then you have more of an exuberant celebration around Ram, and you actually have Ram Leelas, where people get together and enact stories and do so Ram's stories, the actions of Ram Leela is enacted out. And again, this was another way stories were kept alive, because every small village would do it in their own small way. The community would get together, people would practice. I'm Ram, I'm Sita, I'm Hanuman, I'm Lakshman, I'm any of the main characters, whatever.
Hmm.
And they would put up like a little community play. And the whole village would gather and listen to the stories and reenact it. So this
Hmm.
was like a very, it's very personal, but it's also very community based at
And
the
then,
same time.
well, what, how does the West then typically look when it celebrates the holiday?
Yeah, so I think in the West, so we definitely find massive amounts of Garba going on, right? So I live in the Bay Area, and I can tell you that, in fact, like everything in America, we've sort of supersized it. So it's no longer just restricted to the 9 days, because of the. So obviously, since we don't get the days off, we as Hindus, we tend to time shift our festivals to the weekends.
Okay.
So this time Diwali is on a weekend. But if it's not on a weekend, if it's on the weekday, then we might do a small something at home. But most people, even if they take the day off, it's hard to kind of do it in an exuberant way. So we'll do the big celebration on the weekend before or after.
Yeah.
And I think because of this habit, I think we've come to a point where we've sort of now supersized it, and we celebrated, weekends like way before and way after. So Garba has actually started, almost 6 weeks before even Navratri came, which to me was unusual. I still try to go for Garba during those 10 days. But if you want, you can actually go for Garbas even now. They're still happening. So in some sense, we've supersized the celebration, but I think at the core of it, you still retain some of that core, um, uh, you know, emphasis on the female divine and the celebration of her and her powers and the many, many modes that she takes. So that's one example. Same for the Durga Puja, you will find that communities from that part of India, if it's a big enough community, will get together and organize some of these public kiosks that I was talking about. Maybe not the size of two garages, but the size of a room, definitely.
Hmm.
You'll find these big ones happening. And then again, depends on really the size of the community. In most of the mandirs, and if you go to a Hindu mandir, you will find a celebration being done at some scale. So if you live in a very small community where there are, just 100 Hindus, they'll still be celebrating in some ways, maybe just in somebody's house, as part of the temple. As the community becomes bigger and has more money and resources and more people to do this, you'll find these more massive celebrations starting to get recreated. So New York has pretty massive celebrations. New Jersey has pretty massive celebrations.
Hmm.
California has pretty massive celebrations where you'll find large numbers of Hindu communities. You'll find these celebrations start to size up in scale.
New Jersey just recently erected the largest Hindu temple in the United States, I believe.
I believe it's the second largest in the world.
Second largest in the world. I know it's the largest in the US, but I didn't know how it compared in the worldwide. But
Yeah,
yeah, I just recently saw that. I'm hoping to be able to go there sometime.
yeah. I haven't been there, but it looks spectacular. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, it does just look spectacular.
Yeah, I mean, so far, like these holidays are, it's just interesting to me again because when I think of religious holidays, I often think of there being a lot of uniformity. Like, I mean, I'd think of maybe like within Christianity, if you take something like the whether it be if you want to take one like Christmas, where it's like a big major holiday, a lot of Christians will celebrate it in a similar way. But if you want to take a religious sacrament within Christianity, like the Eucharist or something. Like there's a lot of uniformity in how people celebrate these things.
Yeah,
And there's like it seems like everyone kind of does it the same way, maybe with a different perception on it, but at least the way they practice it seems the same. But within Hinduism, it seems like everyone kind of has their own way of celebrating it, but there's still a central core idea there that remains consistent. And I
yeah,
think that's
very well
just
put.
rather unique.
Yeah. I think that's true for our faith in general, because people get confused by the many deities that we have, and we have a lot, and there, in some say they're the manifestations of different attributes or principles. Some say there is one central Brahman, and manifests himself in many different ways, and you identify as a human being with a certain aspect or a certain attribute, and to me that has always appealed, but another Hindu could think a different way, and that is totally fine too,
Hmm.
because ultimately we believe that there is a spark of divinity in each of us, and each of us might have a slightly different journey, or I mean we will have a different journey. It's not might, but we each will have a different journey. The important thing is to be on the right path. And there isn't just one path. You don't have to. You can take the most straight direct path, which would be probably tougher. You could take a more meandering path. You could backtrack a few and then come back. But ultimately everyone's sort of on this journey to become one with the divine.
Yeah, because within Hinduism, it's the belief that everyone eventually returns to the divine, right?
Well, that is your goal, whether
Oh,
you
that
will or not. Is that
does
is
it.
where
So
your
there is
karma.
not. It's not necessarily guaranteed that everyone will.
No, that's what you have to do. Good karma.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so I know karma is a different concept here, but yeah, the whole idea of do the right karam, do you are only entitled to the right deeds, and ultimately everything that you do in your life is sort of adding up towards your attempt to get to moksha. But it is fully recognized that moksha is a multi-birth for most people, um, who are not the most evolved souls, which describes almost everybody. For most people, it's going to be a multi lifetimes to get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
multiple births, multiple lifetimes to work your way to that.
So then theoretically, someone could just keep reincarnating for like almost ever if they never work their way towards moksha.
Yeah,
Moksha.
you could. That's why I said you could backslide too.
Yeah. Hmm.
You could do bad deeds and end up backsliding on the. Um, yeah,
Okay. Anyway, that was just a little sidetrack there, but
yeah. But I think,
um,
back to the festivals, right? So,
yeah.
so if you talk specifically of Diwali, a lot of Hindu festivals, I told you they're linked to the lunar calendar, and a lot of Hindu festivals come on the full moon night, which is called Purnima. Diwali is also interesting. It comes on the no moon night. It's called Amavasya in Sanskrit, and so again, I think it's a very interesting lunar phase because the time of the new moon is also considered a time of great cosmic power,
Hmm.
and the specific time, the specific Amavasya that Diwali comes in, it corresponds to the time. Let me use some English words. When the sun is in the Scorpio and just opposite to the zodiac of the Taurus, and basically that means the sun and moon are on one side of the earth, and there's
Yeah.
a constellation called Palladius, which in Vedic astrology is called the Kartik Nakshatra. So it's on the other side. So this is like, there's a lot of stuff happening. It's a dark night, and there's a lot of stuff happening in the heavens, and that's the time when the power. You think of a pre-electric age, right? It's a dark, moonless night, and the power of a small flickering oil lamp, and the impact it has. And then when you multiply that small flickering oil lamp by many, many others, it just has, like I said, a multi-sensory experience. A lot of our festivals sort of work on that principle.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
So,
then in other ways, in a more philosophical way, it's also the triumph of light over darkness. Because when you're going through rough times, when you're going through a bad time, you're just trying to look for some hope, some beacon, some sliver of light to show you the way, right? And this
yeah,
concept of light triumphing over darkness is a very human longing, right? Because
yeah,
when it's dark, it's you're sad, you're looking for the morning to come, for the light to show up. Clouds have silver linings. So a lot of human terminology is always about finding the light in the dark. And so
yeah.
Diwali is
Hmm.
again the triumph of a tiny little pinprick of light over the darkest night in that month.
And do these holidays, both of them, or maybe Diwali only, but do any of them have any like big concluding factors to them, like the last day there's something big that happens, or is it all sort of consistent throughout?
Well, I think the 10th day of the Shahara is the Navratri is kind of the big conclusion, because if you had that multi garage big murti of Durga, that's the day you take it down and you disassemble the whole thing and you float it away in the water. That's pretty dramatic. If
Hmm.
you are celebrating Ram, then you have on the 10th day of the Shera, you actually burn effigies of Ravan.
Mm.
And again, depending on the money of your community, the money and size of your community, it can be like a tiny one or it can be a massive, multi-storied, sized effigy.
Yeah.
Uh, and everything in between. So there are some pretty dramatic finales. If you had that thing going in your house, the steps that I was talking about, the 10th day is when you put everything away, right? So yeah, that you could say is the finale. Diwali, I don't think has a finale in that sense that you're looking at.
Okay.
I mostly talked about Diwali. It's actually a 5-day festival. Not we never do something. We never do one day things, right? So Diwali is also a 5-day festival. But honestly, in the modern times, I think most people end up celebrating that one day that I'm talking about, which is the third day of the 5 days, when you decorate your houses. You and so Diwali is let me talk about the run up to Diwali, right? So there's this festival, but also Diwali was so it's coming at the time of the fall season, right? And the winter harvest has just been brought in. So
Hmm.
it's a time of prosperity. If you think back, people are like getting ready to celebrate. The seasons are changing.
Yeah.
Um, and in a modern day concept, it's a time when we traditionally always not only decorated our houses, but it was a time for like a deep cleaning. And that's because on the night of Diwali, you worship Lakshmi. A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people worship Lakshmi, who is the goddess of wealth.
Okay.
And the goddess of wealth likes to go to houses that are clean and well decorated. So that's an incentive. If you want the goddess of wealth to come in your house and bless you with wealth, then here's an incentive to clean and kind of declutter and
Maybe
uh,
that's why I'm not wealthy. My house is
it's
always a
coming up.
mess.
It's coming up. You have a chance. So I know, just speaking for myself, right? I use it as a nice marker for me every year to make sure that I've kind of gone through things that that you don't touch every year. So like, oh, I've gone cleaned out the closets and got rid of stuff, and like
Hmm.
looked at the garage and swept it out. Things like that, which stuff that you don't do every day. It's a very nice way to kind of force yourself to do that. And also, in the traditionally people would get their houses whitewashed and things like that, so like a general sprucing up
Yeah.
that leads to the day. And so you light the diyas, But the other thing that's very typically associated with Diwali is Rangoli. Are you familiar with the concept of Rangoli?
Not really.
Okay. So Rangoli, you know mandalas?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, anyway, so Rangoli is kind of temporary art, is the best way to describe it. It's temporary art that is done in front of your houses.
Okay.
Typically, we'll do it like right at our front door entrance, and it could again be made with many different things. It could be made out of flowers. It could be made out of a ground up rice paste. It could be made out of rice powder, or a mixture of those, or colored. Nowadays, colored sand is very popular, and the idea is, you do it as a way of worshiping. So you sit down in front of your house, you clean it, you sweep it, and then you kind of draw these designs. And they're
Yeah.
meant to be temporary. So typically they'll be gone by the end of the day. The next morning you sweep it and start again. And so for Diwali, and so there are people in traditional lifestyles, people who do that every day. You do a small rangoli in front of your house every day. It was like, you sweep your house, you clean it, and then you do this little rangoli. And Rangoli is its own fascinating science because there's a lot of research being done about how it was a combination of math skills, spatial skills, and design skills. So it really developed your brain in many interesting ways. And especially if you did it every day, which it was part of a traditional lifestyle. I don't
Hmm.
think anybody follows. Very few people follow that traditional lifestyle anymore. But I think around Diwali, a lot of people take the effort to do like these rangolis, and so you beautify the outside of your house, whatever that may be. It could be
Hmm.
just your entryway if you live in an apartment, or a small little room, or it could be a big, if you have a porch, you can go more elaborate. But the idea is, again, that it's temporary. And, after a day or two, you just sweep it off.
Yeah.
And it's there to, again, beautify the entrance, create a more welcoming environment for the Devi to visit. But also, traditionally, the Rangoli was made out of rice powder or rice paste. So it was always also a way to feed like little creatures, ants and things like that. Like sometimes they themselves would be, taking, so I think it's just the holistic nature of Hinduism, that everything that you do never has just one meaning or one purpose. So you're
Hmm.
doing it to beautify it. You're doing it as a way of, showing your devotion. You're doing it as a way to give back to nature and community. So
Yeah.
everything has always got multiple meanings, just to make it complicated.
And so you mentioned about making the entrance beautiful so that the deity, something about the deity coming in or something along those lines. Is the
It's
belief
part
that
of the general beautification process.
what was that?
It's just part of a general beautification process. You can beautify your house however you feel like, and people get very creative, or they just leave it depending on their personal preference. Just like Christmas, right? You can go all out, or you can just put up the basics, or you may do nothing. So
Yeah.
some
Mhm.
of that is just more personal preference and what you want to do.
But is there a level of belief that being more fully invested into these holidays or really following the traditions comes with more of a blessing in a sense from the deities or um like to what extent does that impact the relationship there? I'm not entirely sure how to word it.
So I think the people who go all out for it, so again, there are no rules. You're not required to do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm obviously talking as somebody who is very enthusiastic about it and therefore do a lot of it. You might
Hmm.
run into your Hindu colleague who will be like, I don't know any of that stuff, I'm too busy, or I'm not into it, whatever, and that's
Hmm.
okay. And it could be a stage of your life, right? I also, when I was living in a dorm, I really wasn't doing much. I would maybe put like a little diya and do some prayers, but it was just too much effort to go do it in a college dorm setup.
Yeah.
So it's all, like I said, it's all very contextual. And the fact that you don't do it today doesn't mean that you won't do it the rest of your life. And the fact that I'm doing it today doesn't mean that I'll do it the rest of my life. So I think it's all very contextual. But if you do it, you're probably doing it. And again, I hate to make blanket statements about anything related to the Hindu faith. But if you're doing it, probably you're doing it because you are in some way inspired to, or you feel that the Devi Devtas are part of you, and doing this is a way of offering respect to them, being part of a grand tradition, ancient
Hmm.
tradition that brings you closer to them. It's a way of honoring them. So there's a lot of, for those who care, there is a lot of detail on why things are done. But most people don't practice it at that level.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
One way to
Interesting.
help contextualize the complexity of Hinduism is this. Most religions have one or two books, right? And you can spend
Hmm.
a lifetime, people do spend a lifetime studying those books and trying to emulate those books. And, Hinduism has about 10,000 sacred scriptures. So I always say there's nobody who can really claim to be an expert in all of them, even if you immersed, and then remember, most of them are written in Sanskrit, which is a
Yeah.
language very few people speak nowadays. So even if you were very unusual and you immersed yourself into it in toddlerhood and kept at it through your whole life, it's like multiple PhDs, and there are
Hmm.
scriptures that focus on health, and there's scriptures that focus on devotion, and
Yeah.
scriptures that focus on war, and scriptures that focus on dance and music, and ways to worship and ways to meditate and ways
Hmm.
to do yoga. So even if you were specializing, you'd probably specialize in one or more, two of them. You really wouldn't be able, unless you're some totally genius. I don't even know what kind of person that is. So you'd get like, think about the people who have PhDs, right?
Yeah.
Two or three PhDs, right? They don't have, like, most people, like, I don't know anybody who has 20 PhDs, right? And each
Hmm.
of these you could study at a multiple PhD level.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why a lot of Hindus that I know of or I'm aware of, they tend to focus on certain parts of the faith of the religion.
Mhm.
And that's what they study and that's what they do. And they don't
And that's
really
totally
spend much time looking
and,
into anything else.
and that is totally appropriate,
Hmm.
because everyone has a role to play. Every way to get to the divine is good. Whether you do it through work, whether you do it through worship, whether you do it through your arts and crafts and dance or music, or whatever path you have chosen, social service, seva, that's a big part of worship too. Because again, we realize that one way doesn't work for everybody. So, there's no point in prescribing that each of you, every Tuesday, you must come to the temple and do this. There's some people who are just not into going to a temple. And if
Yeah.
you force them to come to a temple, they're just not going to be much into it. They may come out of societal pressure or whatever, but it's not really going to benefit them spiritually. Whereas they
Hmm.
may be the kind of person who prefers to be out there taking action instead of going to the temple, or maybe perfecting their dance or art or crafts or
Yeah.
whatever. So I think it just recognizes that there's too much diversity in humans to
Hmm.
really insist that one way is the right way.
Yeah, I would say out of the what's the top five most popular or most followed religions, Hinduism is probably the one that is the most lenient in its practice, meaning people can kind of there's a lot of options to choose from in how you practice it. And it's considered okay or fine as long as you're trying to do what's good in a sense.
Yeah.
So out of the major religions, it's the one with like tons of different paths because a lot of the like for instance Christianity and Islam both are pretty they pretty much have one way. There's one way to make it to heaven in the concept of those
Right.
faiths. Judaism, there's a lot of debate, but still there's this underlying concept of following the law.
Right.
So it is interesting in Hinduism the how out of the major faiths it is the one that is the most paths to follow.
Yes, it is. It's also the oldest. I think that adds to the complexity. But I think also, some people don't like that. I mean, I love the flexibility and I love the options.
Hmm.
But some people don't, and I think that's something we need to recognize is that, and especially in the modern world, we have become increasingly binary. And I think that's one of the reasons people struggle to understand Hinduism, is because I can't give you clear cut answers to anything. And, you may appreciate that, but a lot of people get frustrated. They're like, just tell me. Like, tell me yes or no. Tell me black or white. Tell me which is the right way. And I'm like,
Generally, in my experience, I found that people who are a little bit tend to be more creative, a little bit more artistic, a little bit more um, free spirited. They tend to like more mystical religions or
"Mhm,
religions with multiple paths, whether that be something in the New Age category, something like Hinduism, or something that's a little bit more just mystical and like kind of
yeah,
there's not necessarily a one way path, but people who tend to be I'm not entirely sure how to word it, but they like answers. I'll just put it that way. They like answers.
yeah,
They tend to like the religions like Islam and Christianity and stuff that give like a one path and it is interesting how different personalities do tend to be attracted to different types of religions.
It is. It is. It is. And especially in a world of, shrinking attention spans, where we've gone from reading, 2000 word articles to 500 word articles to Insta posts and TikToks, sometimes these
Yep.
concepts are really hard to boil down.
I
And you end up
am still
giving,
one of the I'm still one of the few Gen Zers who reads books. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, people tell me, oh, can you give me the 30-second version of that? I'm like, okay, it gets hard.
and as you said, I think this is a whole nother topic, but I think part of the reason why there is this binary problem sometimes, or at least people not willing or able to understand different cultures, is simply because they want that 30-second snippet.
Yeah,
They want that 30-second snippet, and then they'll tear that 30-second snippet apart and
right.
never take the opportunity to learn more.
Yeah. And whatever you tend to say in that 30-second snippet, oh, that is what it is. Well, no, that is just what it was at a given period of time. And you asked me, that was the first thing that came to mind, or what seemed to fit the context then.
Yeah.
So I think that is the other hard thing people struggle with Hinduism, is that everything is so contextual. I know that's
Hmm.
not the topic of the talk today, but our books are also, there a lot of our books come with sort of a built-in expiry, because they're called smriti, which means they were for a period of time.
Yeah.
They're not eternal. Like, it's not like I laid it down forever. This
Hmm.
was the guidance. This was the code for a certain period of time.
But
That implies that times change.
would there still be this idea that even though it was written for a time period, there's still something that we can glean from it today?
Yeah, I mean, values, yes,
Okay.
values and ways. But like, when you start getting into the more applied aspects of it, right?
Okay.
If there's a
Hmm.
code of laws or how people should behave or live, right? Then obviously those change,
Yeah.
no
Because
matter what
I
you
would see
believe.
a similar parallel within like the Christian tradition when you look at the Old Testament where it talks about leave a corner of your field for the poor in the Old Testament law, which obviously a lot of people don't own fields anymore because it's not an agricultural society anymore. So the concept, the value of giving to the poor still applies, but the actual specific practice of the time period no
Yeah,
longer is the same.
right.
Something along
Yeah,
those
you still
lines.
give to the poor. You just don't have to do it via the field with method that was prescribed.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, and
Interesting.
even when we talk about Diwali, right? Even though it's linked to the story of the residents of Ayodhya welcoming Ram back with the lighting the diyas, you
Hmm.
can celebrate Diwali now without lighting a single diya, right? Like, I was talking to somebody in Seattle, and they're like, I can't get it's too windy. I can't do these lamps outside, because they're like, how do you decorate? And I was like, oh, I just put these lamps on my porch. They're like, yeah, too windy. It's not going to work here. And similarly, people who live in like Mumbai, right? They just live in high rises. You're not going to
Yeah.
be able to put up diyas, right? When you're like on the 11th floor, then it's definitely a fire hazard to be putting a
Yeah, yeah.
and you're facing the ocean, right, with the ocean breeze. So yeah, then they do electric lights. So it's not a historical reenactment. I don't have to dress up the way Sita and residents of Ayodhya would have dressed up back then. I dress up in festive clothes of today, and I make festive foods of today. Right? There's some inspiration, but yeah, like chocolate has become super popular. Was not a traditional food, but
Hmm.
it's not a historical enactment that you have to go back and relive life as it might have been thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Is there anything else to add to the holidays? Or do you think we covered a lot of it?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think I would just say that, these holidays are also super accessible. So even though you live in small places, I'm sure if you Google, there's a Hindu mandir around you, and they're almost bound to be doing some of these traditions. So, and in general, you'll find people are very welcoming, and you don't have to convert, you don't have to do anything else. But if you're coming there to learn, they're totally part of that,
Yeah.
and they're very welcoming and easy to obtain. And then, of course, how could I forget food, right? Big part of all festivals is food. And so, if nothing else, you can go enjoy some Diwali sweets, because Diwali is again characterized. Traditionally, people would exchange sweets for it. And Indian sweets are quite unique and quite different, definitely worth a try. But there's also a lot of other stories. So, when I talked about food, right? So, there's also a day like the fifth day of Diwali. You actually make a. You were talking about this concept of giving.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big part of Diwali and other festivals too, because you make annakut, which is called a mountain of food. Anaj is like grains, right? So you make a mountain of grains and you worship it, and then of course you distribute it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's another way of just, distributing, giving, doing charity, and giving it a ritualistic thing. So people tend to do it more rigorously than if you just told them to do good deeds. And then another, but that's only for some communities. Some communities will actually use the fifth day of the festival, the end day of the day. They'll actually go and worship their tools. So whatever your tool might be, if you're a farmer, you can worship your tractor or your plow. If you're a writer, we get our computers and our iPads and things like that. Our pens, papers. People worship their implements. Again, it's kind of this holistic nature of our festivals and our faiths that everything we do is related to the place we are in, the time that we are in cosmologically, historically, the place we live in, what are we doing. And so a lot of our traditions will evolve even between generations, right? Because my father might have been doing a different kind of job where his implements or tools would have been something else than mine are in a different age. So, and
Yeah.
that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to go back and look for a historical tool that my ancestors used to worship. It's quite literally I'm worshiping and honoring what gives me a livelihood today.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
a day of
That would
rest
make
for them.
sense.
It's a day of honoring them. So I think a lot of our traditions sort of are that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see we're approaching an hour. So if you have any other concluding thoughts, or I will then close out if not.
Yeah, no, I would I enjoyed the time. Thanks for taking time to think about it and educate your readers about it. And I would just say have fun with it, Go to the temple, look it up, go to the Indian store, they'll probably be selling kind of fun things. I showed you the plain diya, but you can buy like these pretty decorated ones. This one is filled with wax.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, so you don't have to struggle with the oil and all of that stuff I was talking about. Or you could just do like a battery operated one, I don't know if you can see, but that's like a
That's
battery operated tea light.
yeah.
I use a ton of these too. So it's a lot of fun. And I think folks will be happy to include you. So happy Diwali.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Pushpita, for coming on here and sharing about the holidays going on right now within Hinduism. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And as always, friends, go out there and light the world yourselves.